Welcome in, everybody. Tuesday night edition, Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Torres. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody's having a great day. College hoops off-season grades are rolling on. Okay, so by now, you've seen all the ones that we've done. We've done UNC, we've done NC State, we've done Louisville, we've done Kentucky, we've done UConn, we've done Florida, maybe even one or two others by the time that you listen to this. But tonight we're going to do something a little bit different. We are going to do our college hoops offseason grade St. John's, but with a twist. Rather than me just yelling and screaming for 20 minutes, we actually bring on a guest to talk a little bit about the St. John's Red Storm, their offseason, and what it means going forward. That guest, Zach Braziller, who covers St. John's for the New York Post. I'll be honest, I don't think there's literally a single person on planet Earth that is better to talk St. John's basketball than Zach. He covered the team in the Mike Anderson. He actually covered the team back to the Steve Lavin era, but he was there before Pitino. He's there now, and he just has a wealth of insight on what the program was like before Pitino got there, what this past season was like, and most importantly, what the heck is going to happen this season, where I believe that St. John's has a top 5 team. So college hoops offseason grades with a special guest, Zach Braziller, in just one moment. By the way, should mention, if you are a St. John's fan, make sure, of course, that you are following our Torres on SJU account, Torres on SJU, for all your late-breaking St. John's news. Oh, by the way, you know what's going on in New York City right now. Big Rick Energy. You need a gift for the holiday, whatever, birthdays, whatever. It's summertime, but still. Big Rick Energy t-shirt, AaronTorresOnline.com/merchandise. All right, also, before we get started, a couple quick other reminders. One, make sure you're subscribed. Aaron Torres Pod YouTube channel. New clips, new videos going up every single day on YouTube. We'll keep going with these off-season grades through the end of the week. I'll be back next week, and then it's going to be time to kind of start talking football. Media days, kind of the middle of July. That'll take us into the season. A lot of football ahead, but more off-season grades later in the week. Also, really quick before we get started, by the way, I think I said it, but make sure you're subscribed to Apple, Spotify as well. But before we get started, want to thank our friends. Before we get started, want to thank our partners. Want to thank Collie Puffs and ColliePuffs.com. Okay, so I've told you Collie Puffs story, but family-owned company not far from where I live. Basically, the founder, Joey, huge sports fan, was sitting on the couch one day. He's saying, I'm watching all these games, these football games, these basketball games, maybe a little baseball, and I need a snack that's healthy and delicious. I don't need to be a big fat slob sitting here eating junk food. I need a snack that is both healthy but delicious, something I'm going to love, my kids are going to love. He came up with Collie Puffs. Baked, not fried, avocado oil, no grease, healthy ingredients, the opposite of the crappy stuff in your grocery aisle. The best part is, though, they taste delicious. At this point, here's the good news. You don't even have to take my word for it. This is what I need you to do. Go to ColliePuffs.com. That's CAULIPUFFS.com, ColliePuffs.com. You can also search on Amazon.com as well. And here's the best part. If you really do want to try them, the folks at Collie Puffs are giving listeners of the Aaron Torres Pod a very special offer. How about this? That's what you need to do. If you go to ColliePuffs.com, use promo code Torres at checkout, you get, how about this? You get 15% off the price of your purchase. So you want to buy one bag, you want to buy 100 bags, go to ColliePuffs.com, use promo code Torres, Torres, get 15% off. So what we're going to do, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back. St. John's off-season grade with Zach Braziller from the New York Post. You're going to enjoy it. Appreciate your support. All right, joining me via Zoom, doing something a little bit different with the St. John's off-season grade. Rather than just hearing me yell and scream and get excited about a team for a few minutes, we're going to bring on somebody who knows them much better than me, the beat writer for the New York Post. You've been there, you've been covering St. John's since before it was cool to cover St. John's. Zach Braziller, what's going on, man? How you doing?
What's up, man? Yeah, I've been covering St. John's before anyone cared about St. John's. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is an off-season grade, but I do want to talk about, like, what has the last 3 years of your life, you're professional. I mean, personally, we'll stay out of that, but professionally, like, I'm a Big East guy. I grew up in Big East country. I mean, I grew up when St. John's had Artest and Eric Barkley, and you go on and on down the list. And, you know, there were some dark times there. I mean, what has your life been like going from, you know, frankly, a team that I don't want to be rude, but yeah, I don't know that it was like a big thing on the national stage to you fast forward to late January, early February of this year. It feels like they were basically probably the biggest story in the sport.
Yeah, it's been very different. It's been a lot of fun. You know, um, the year before Pitino, Mike Anderson's last year, I was like, you know, our Nick beat writer had left, so I was kind of splitting time with doing a lot of Knicks and doing some St. John's, and you know, they're kind of irrelevant. You know, they had some good years with Chris Mullen had a good year, with Lavin had a good year, but for the most part, most years they were irrelevant, and now I mean, we basically are treating them like an extra pro team. I traveled every game. I don't. Before Pitino's rival, we did not want. You know, if they were good in January, February, we would travel. But it wasn't like, yeah, we're traveling. Like last year, I went to the Bahamas. I never thought
Nice.
I would go to the Bahamas for St. John's. You know, this year they're in Vegas, and it's not even like I don't even have to ask my boss, "Are we going?" It's like, yeah, of course we're going. You know, it's a very new thing, and it's great. I mean, he's incredible to cover. You know, he keeps you on your toes. You really never know what you're going to get from him. You know, this schedule next year is great. They got Bama and Ole Miss here. They go to Vegas for the Players Era. They go to Atlanta for Kentucky, and then obviously you have all the Big East games. It's it's a new world, man. I don't want to go back to what it was like before Pitino. That's for sure. Like people really care now, and they matter, and that's just so different from before Pitino was like, yeah, if they're good, you obviously had your hardcore fans, but before Pitino, it's like, yeah, if they're good, people would start to care a little, but now it's like everything matters, and it's kind of like covering the junior Knicks in a little way. Like they've become that big,
Yeah, let me ask you this. Was there a moment, maybe not, I mean, maybe when he got the job, but then certainly this past year, I mean, Fallon, all that, was there a moment where, and maybe it was early, where it was just like, immediately it's like, oh, this is going to be complete. Forget the wins and losses, just the coverage, the interest, things like that.
I mean, honestly, even the first offseason, when they're bringing all these players, our traffic numbers were crazy. I think you could tell right away it was going to be different. And, I think, probably, obviously the Seton Hall loss where they, they blew that game and he went on his rant and everyone was going nuts about it. And it made huge headlines. And like, to me, it was like, I barely blinked because like he says that stuff all the time.
Yep.
But it was the national news it became was kind of like, wow, this is different, because it was everywhere, and, we saw this past year with the RJ Lewis thing when he benched him, that was everywhere. Like he makes such big news with everything. It's kind of, it's kind of wild.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, you mentioned Coach Pitino keeping you on your toes. One thing that just from a distance I've seen is, one, he's just a person that people are interested in. But then two, you never know when he's going to show up on WFAN or whatever. What is it like to be around him every day, to be covering him every day? But then even, like I said, in the offseason, I think it was 2-3 weeks ago, he throws out first pitch at a Yankees game and he's doing interviews before that. Just what is it like to kind of be around him on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I mean, he's great to cover because, number one, he's very communicative. He's easy to get a hold of. He's, I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but like, it's easier for me to communicate with Rick Pitino than it was Mike Anderson.
Wow.
Which is nuts. I mean, you think about that. Mike Anderson didn't want relationships with the people he covered. I did my best. He had no interest in that. Rick Pitino, like, does. He's not hard to get him on text. Like, he's not hiding anything. where, Mike Anderson kind of felt like he was, everything was like a national secret. And I always thought that was kind of silly. But yeah, like when I think he's going to be negative, he's positive. When I think he's going to be positive, he's negative. He's hard to predict. He has some of his sayings, and like most coaches, kind of has stuff you've heard before. But he's very unpredictable, which is a lot of fun as a writer. That
No doubt.
as a reporter, like when you really don't know, and like, look, I when I started it was Lavin, then Mullen, then Mike Anderson, like I actually learned stuff about basketball covering Rick Pitino. Like I never felt like that happened before to me. Like you actually learn things by going to his press conferences and talking to him, which, to me is very unique.
That's very interesting. Let's get into a little bit of the off season, because that's, doing off season stuff here. Obviously the season, incredible year, ends in a little bit of disappointment. The thing that stood out to me was just the immediate transition into the offseason. By the way, we'll have graphics running, people watching, listening, but for people who are listening on podcast, Ian Jackson's added, Josan Sanan, Bryce Hopkins, on and on, Ozzie Sellers, Dylan Mitchell, whatever. I guess just even those early days, because so the portal opened the day after the opening weekend. So, right. And I think Josan Sanan committed like the day the portal opened or whatever. So I don't even know where to start. I mean, what was the game plan? I mean, let me even backtrack. Maybe I'll frame it better this way, but you lose obviously in crushing fashion. I think the shooting was always an issue all season. Like, was that a priority a month before the season ended to improve that element of things? Did that become more of a priority after you lose early in the tournament? Like, what was the plan going into the offseason?
Yeah, I think they had known for a while they needed to get better offensively. I forgot what they finished with on KenPom. I think it might be around 65 in offense, and they were like second in defense. Now part of that was Davon Smith really wasn't right the second half of the year. He had the shoulder issue, and that never really kind of got better. And I do feel like a healthy Davon Smith changes things a lot for them in terms of where they finished offensively and even in that Arkansas game. But yeah, they knew they had to get better offensively. They wanted to, be more of a complete team. And like last year, their defense carried them and their athleticism carried them. And, I don't know if they just lost that Arkansas game because of shooting. I think it was a bad matchup. I also don't think Arkansas was a 10 seed. Anyone who watched them in the tournament could see that. I mean, they should have made the Elite Eight, should have beat Texas Tech. And obviously getting Flan back helped against the way St. John's played with their pressure. It was just a disaster of a game. They played awful. It was a bad matchup against a really big athletic team. But yeah, no, shooting was always going to be, a focal point for them. And, I feel like they really, not second round winning overachieved, but like the year they overachieved. When you looked at their roster, when you looked at, Davon Smith, one of their better players, basically kind of being a shell of himself the second half because of the shoulder injury, they really overachieved. And they wanted to raise that talent level. And I mean, I don't think there's any question they've done that. I mean, they have, people think they might have 2 first-round picks with Jackson and Sanon. Obviously, Bryce Hopkins is terrific. Zuby Ejiofor back is, I think, going to be a top 20 player in the country, if not more better than that. Dylan Darling and Kite from Idaho State, I think, is someone from everyone I've talked to, like, could be a big surprise. He was the player of the year in the Big Sky. I know it's a low level, but, I talked to people, including his old coach at Washington State, Kyle Smith, who thinks he's going to be terrific for St. John's. Like, he'll be able to defend at that level. He brings that, true ball mover, passing point guard with all these shooters. So yeah, look, there are obviously questions with, do they have enough playmaking? Obviously, almost a completely new team, but in terms of on paper talent, it's a terrific roster. I mean, I don't think anyone would disagree with that.
No doubt. Let me even backtrack a little bit, since you're talking to all these recruits, their parents, their whatever. I'll give kind of a random example, bring it back full circle. But I was out at BYU a few weeks ago interviewing DeBonsa and Kevin Young and whatever. And I only bring it up because the staff was talking about how different this offseason is compared to last year because of the success of the regular season, postseason, but then also, the arrival of AJ DeBonsa and basically, guys that wouldn't have even picked up their phone calls a year ago. Now it's like, it's cool to be part of BYU. In talking to recruits and parents and AAU people and things of that nature, have you felt the same with St. John's, where everybody knew who Rick Pitino was and what he was capable of, but it doesn't feel, maybe people were never turning down Rick Pitino's call, but it just feels like any guy that St. John's wanted, they were instantly in the conversation for. And maybe I'm wrong, and I'm curious for your perspective. I don't even know that was that way maybe a year ago, certainly 2 summers ago.
Yeah, it made it easier. I don't think there's any question about that. Look, we all know money's a big factor now. But yeah, it made it easier. I mean, they were a huge story. Joe Sonsanen's agent told me like their success was a big part of why the conversation started, and they showed college basketball can still be a huge story in New York City despite it being a pro town. They were selling out the Garden. They were a national story now. And, I think it clearly helped. And then you start well where you bring in Joson, you bring in Hopkins, and then that you have, that for other recruits who, hey, look, we already have this, we already have that. We obviously have a terrific big guy in Zuby. We need a wing shooter. You want to be part of a top 5 team in New York City. That's going to be a huge story all year. And, maybe a borderline NBA guy like Ozias Sellers says, well, they have 2 first-round picks on this team. I'm going to have scouts at every game.
Mm-hmm.
It's an opportunity for me. And, everyone you talk to definitely mentioned, you couldn't follow college basketball last year without knowing about what St. John's was doing. And, as much success as Rick has had in the past, it's still proof of concept. It's still you see what he did, what you developing Edge of 4 and RJ Lewis. You see getting it
Clayton, by the way.
Right. Getting it to work with two lead guards who are kind of similar in Kadari and Davon Smith. And, you see what he does with a guy like Aaron Scott, who had a terrific season. So it's the player development component with New York City and, the city really getting behind St. John's, and St. John's is kind of cool again, like you mentioned, they matter again. And I don't think there's any doubt, money obviously is a factor and they're in a good spot there, but it's beyond that because other schools are offering similar money for some of these guys. It's going to be interesting to see how it all goes.
Well, let's talk about how it's all going to go. A couple players I want to ask you about. The big one that I think everyone's intrigued by, Ian Jackson. There's some talk about what the role will be. Can he be a true point guard? All of that. It's early. I don't even know if St. John's has officially started practices yet. We're recording here, June 19th, 18th, something like that. We'll run it maybe a few days later. What is at the very least the expectation of the staff for Ian Jackson? Because he's a guy that kind of more played off the ball at Carolina. And now it seems from a distance like he's going to have the ball. Hey, forget what I'm thinking. Rick Pitino said in the press release when he committed, he's going to be the next great St. John's point guard. So I guess that's probably a presumption that they're pretty excited about what he could potentially be.
Yeah, look, he's going to have the ball in his hands. There's no question about that. I think Dylan Darling is a guy who's going to play a lot of point guard for them as well. And if, you look at Rick's career, he's always had kind of 2 primary ball handlers. Last year you had it obviously with Kadari and Davon. I expect you have it this year with Ian and Dylan Darling. You go back to Walter Clayton and Danish Jenkins at Iona, or even Russ Smith and Peyton Siva. He played at North Carolina. He was off the ball completely. I know his people were not thrilled with that. And his role in general. In high school at Cardinal Hayes, he played some on the ball. And look, it's going to be a development. It's going to be a process. Patience is going to be needed. But, you're dealing with an incredibly talented player people think could be a lottery pick in a year. And then you're dealing with Rick Pitino, an all-time great coach. I mean, I'd be surprised if they don't find a way to make it work.
What about Bryce Hopkins? I mean, an all Big East guy 3 seasons ago, season-ending injury, comes back this year, isn't right, shuts it down. What is the expectation of him?
Yeah, I mean, look, they were impressed with his workout. I've heard from people even who saw Providence practicing in February that he looked great. Um, you know, I think Bryce Hopkins and Zuby together could be terrific. You know, one area St. John's, as good as they were defensively last year, one area they struggled was defensive rebounding, and you know that hurt them a ton in the Arkansas game. You know, they were playing Aaron Scott at the four, and he wasn't really a true four. Bryce is more of a true four. He's a really good rebounder, and while he might not be a great defender, that defensive rebounding component is going to be big for them, and it's going to allow Zuby to do what he does, which is guard on the perimeter, be a rim protector, and then you have Bryce on the backside cleaning off the glass. And I think people kind of forget just how good of a player he is. Um, you know, he's dynamic. I mean, obviously he wasn't quite right last year. I think he came back and then they found he had a bone bruise in the knee, and by the time he was really right in February, they figured let's save that extra year. I mean, they're really high on him. It's funny, you talk about all these guys. He kind of gets overlooked a little because he
100%.
did commit so early. But yeah, him and Zuby together is going to be a load to deal with.
Yeah, no, and he was a guy that even as I was prepping for this, you kind of forget about him because he committed so early, like you said. Anybody else, really quick? I mean, Dylan Mitchell comes from Cincinnati, Ozzie Sellers from Stanford. Like we were saying, Bryce Hopkins, by the way, his last full healthy season, 16 points, 8 boards per game. So he's playing really well. Anybody else that you're excited about that maybe people aren't talking about?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to Dylan Mitchell. Great interview number one, which is obviously very important to me. But just he, from everything I've heard, he's going to be a Pitino favorite. He's a good of an athlete as there is in the country. He's a terrific defender. He's obviously a big time jumper and finisher, and I think he'll be great in that press. I think he'll fit perfectly with the way they play. I mean, I love what they have up front between him, Zuby, Hopkins, and then Ruben Prey, who really came on last year. And, as that kind of, he could hit a three here and there, he could guard. Like, they're going to have a lot up front there with those guys at the 4 and the 5. And it's going to give them a lot of flexibility. I could see some lineups where you have, Mitchell at the 5, Prey at the 5. Not a lot of obviously true big guys in the Big East. I love what they have up front. I think Prey's got a chance to be a very good player. I know people are high on him, and you saw it as the year went on. He really improved. But yeah, man, they have answers in a lot of spots. It's a rock. I mean, it sounds like they're going to be preseason top 5 in most polls. So it's the hype is warranted, I think.
Really quickly, a couple other things. One, you mentioned the schedule. Alabama at home, part of what we assume is going to be a pseudo home and home.
Right.
Ole Miss at home, Vegas for the Players Era Championship, the Atlanta for Kentucky. I guess I would kind of ask you the same question about scheduling that I did recruiting. The Pitino effect seems like it's real. And now, I mean, I'm guessing these are games that are happening because it's Pitino, because it's MSG. Because, the other thing, too, is just obviously will help a schedule. Even with a loss, it doesn't hurt you like it used to. I mean, let me put it this way. Was scheduling something that St. John's fans were clamoring for in, 4, 5, 6 years ago in the offseason?
Yeah, I mean, I do think fans want to see better schedules. Mike Anderson was known for playing a soft schedule. Yeah, I think it helps. I also think, look, let's be real, man. Big East is looking like a 3-team league.
Yeah.
I mean, UConn's going to be terrific, St. John's, and I think Creighton's underrated. I think Creighton's a potential top 10 team. And, I do like Providence's roster. And, I don't think you can count out Marquette being good, even though for some reason Shaka Smart just ignores the portal. But after that, it's, I don't like Villanova's roster. Georgetown lost their 2 best players. And if you're St. John's, UConn, or Creighton, you better schedule well. Or you're not, you bet, they knew, they kind of went into this saying, we need to schedule really well. And, good UConn's, I've seen their schedule. It's terrific. I know Creighton's and the players there, and they always play a pretty good schedule. So I'm not really concerned, you know, about Creighton's schedule. But like, yeah, I think a big part of it is Pitino, but also they know like we need to schedule well. Like we need to if we're gonna have the kind of seed we hope to have. And with the roster we have, they had no excuse. That was another thing they could use recruits. Like, look, come here, we're gonna be playing big time games early. And I mean Alabama, the second game of the season is absolutely awesome. They've been trying to play Alabama for a few years now. Glad to see it came together, and obviously there's been talk since Pope was hired of playing Kentucky, and then it was off, then it was on, it was off. So they got together, on that. There had been talk of potentially a home and home with North Carolina that fell through. So yeah, but I think the big thing is just knowing the state of the Big East, that they needed to put together a real big time schedule.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you that. What do you think that Rick Pitino and maybe vice versa, Dan Hurley thinks of Pitino and vice versa? I remember 2 years ago at the Big East tournament when really actually St. John's played UConn tougher than anybody did in March. There was, I forget, something with a fan and somebody's yelling.
Yeah,
I can't
Pitino's
remember.
buddy, they were going back and forth. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you?
He's a character, that guy.
Is he? Okay. Well, I'll take your word for it. But
he's funny, man.
Well, I mean, if you could share stories, share stories. But it's more. I listen. I'm not trying to like psychoanalyze anything here, but it's like I do think that UConn, they had those two amazing seasons, and then I think I don't want to say anybody took their foot off the gas. That's not what I'm saying, but right. Hurley, and he's even admitted, like the last two off seasons, it's been a lot of first pitches and ringing the stock market and this and that. And I think St. John's coming in and kicking butt and taking names. I think it kind of reawoke like that chip of, as good as it was, nothing's guaranteed. I mean, is there any relationship? And then do you think, obviously, that they seem to be wired very similarly, so I could see where there'd be some competitive, not very fond of each other type deal?
Let me start with this. I don't think Danny and Rick are going out for beers.
Sure.
They're not, I wouldn't say like they don't like hate each other, but they're competitors, they're rivals. They see each other. They'll be cordial, I'm sure, like in public or something. But like, yeah, they don't necessarily they're not friends. They're trying to beat each other's brains in.
Yeah.
And I love kind of it was kind of unfair fights, right? Hurley played Pitino in the tournament when Pitino was at Ione, and it just wasn't fair. He didn't have the horses to compete. And then his first year at St. John's, UConn was ridiculous. And while St. John's played him tough, 2 of those 3 games, it just wasn't quite fair. And then this past year, St. John's was better. It had a better roster. And maybe this year it's kind of the first year where it's maybe a fair fight, where like the rosters are on even footing. But yeah, look, it's really fun. You like to see the fans go back at it with each other. The coaches are, are going to do their thing. I mean, I'm just hoping we get 2 nice primetime games and we don't get stuck with a noon game. Like, come on, that's no noon game at the Garden. Give me a Friday night or a Saturday night or even a Sunday late afternoon. Don't stop the noon games. Like, a big game should not be at noon. Like, I understand there's some limitations the Garden has with Knicks and Rangers and other stuff, but come on, you got 2 teams that are going to be preseason top 5. Let's get them playing a prime time game. Let both the fan bases get nice and lathered up, and let's have a fun night. We don't need a noon game where everyone's half awake.
Val Ackerman, Big East Commissioner, are you listening? No noon games at MSG. No, I agree. I'll say this is I wasn't able to get back for the game in stores, but that was
what a night that was, man. Yeah. That place was jumping. That was a fun night. I mean, it was UConn came out roaring. The building was just on fire. I mean, that was a lot of fun. As hard as it is to get to stores, that was a lot of fun.
Well, it is hard to get to stores. People would never. That was the moment, I think, nationally, because it was a Friday night. I think it was after NFL, or there wasn't much football at that point. And I think everybody was like, "Oh, this team's really, really, really good." This being St. John's. Real quick, one last one. We'll get to just wrap here. Pitino, it's really a two-part thing. Obviously Patino's in his 70s now, but anybody who's been around him like you have says, he's got the, energy of a much younger guy. One, how long do you think he's realistically going to be around? And I think, probably ballpark it. But two, what is he said? I think you've said, and people who are around him have said that he really wants to set it up so when he leaves, the success can continue. I mean, I'm more curious, like, what does that look like? Does he have in mind the next coach? Does he have in mind the infrastructure? I mean, what is it? Because he has kind of said publicly, I don't want this for me to come in for 4, 5, 6 years and it be awesome and then it goes back to the way it was. So I'd just be curious what he's kind of doing to kind of set things up for the big picture.
Yeah, look, it is interesting. A lot of people have talked about his son as his possible replacement, and now he's at Xavier. He has talked about that. In terms of, like, they have a new AD, Ed Cull, who's a big-time fundraiser. He was really good at Fordham, and he's a St. John's guy. He knows the area, knows the landscape, and I think he's an absolutely terrific hire. And, in this day and age, that's number one, number two, and number three job for any AD is being able to raise money.
Mm-hmm.
With NIL, with now rev sharing, like you need to be able to raise money. And I think Ed Cull is going to be a huge part of why this program doesn't kind of go back to the Stone Age when Rick leaves. As far as him coaching, I mean, I could see 3 to 4 more years, honestly. I mean, who knows? Like, he's very unpredictable. You never know. But, like, the thing I always go back to is he talks about when he was retired, for, I guess, a year or two after the Louisville thing, and he hated it. And, maybe if he didn't experience that before and he hadn't stopped coaching and lost all those years, maybe it's different. But because he had missed those years, because he hated retirement, I think it could be a little different.
Gotcha. Makes perfect sense. Last thing, we'll let you go because I can hear that phone buzzing in the background. Won't ask you to give a grade since you cover the team, but just overall offseason, I think I know the answer. Is there anything that you look at that either the plan going into the offseason was X and it didn't happen, or is there anything this offseason that didn't go to plan, or there was a spot that they wanted to upgrade that they weren't able to? I don't personally see it looking at the roster, but you know the roster better than I do.
I think the only question is, do they have enough playmaking? You obviously have Darling. They're trying to make Ian Jackson into a point guard or more of a point guard. They got a lot of guys who need the ball. Sannon, Sellers, Hopkins, even Zuby. Like, that to me is my only question is, do they have it? Do they have enough ball movers? Do they have enough playmakers? And, I don't think it's going to be an issue. But I think that would be my one question mark. Like, do they, are they going to be too much of an ISO heavy team that relies on individual talent, or can he get them to be cohesive and play together and not count shots and just be, and get more playmaking out of guys like Sannon and Jackson and Sellers.
Perfect. All right. Well, Zach Braziller, of course, you can read all his work at the New York Post. What is it on Twitter? NY_Post_Brazil.
Yep.
So what are you doing? Some Yankees stuff right now? What are they?
A little Yankees. I was Yankees the other day. I'll be there later this week. NBA draft will be a big NBA draft week coming up. I'll be all on the draft then. So yeah, that's what we're looking at.
All right. Well, basketball will be here soon enough. Thank you for the time. We'll be following you, and we appreciate your time. Thank you, Zach.
My guy. Thanks, buddy.